Excuse me. This is Arnold Michaelis. Among the United Nations membership of 110 countries, size is not always an indication of the impact that any one member nation makes upon the family as a whole. Now, this is certainly true in the case of Ceylon, a country roughly about the size of the state of Kansas. To compensate for its size, Ceylon has as its ambassador to the United Nations Dr. G.P. Malalasekara, whose impact upon the General Assembly has been felt since April of 1961. For 30 years, Dr. Malalasekara was professor of Buddhist civilization at the University of Ceylon. In 1957, he was appointed as Ceylon's first ambassador to the Soviet Union, and in 1959 took on the additional ambassadorial duties in Czechoslovakia, Poland, and Romania. Well, having been involved with Buddhist civilization, then going to the Soviet Union, then to Poland, Czechoslovakia, and Romania, Dr. Malalasekara, I have to ask you, what is there left now that you're at the United Nations?
Oh, lots of things are left because the more I see men and things, the more humble I feel. We have a saying in our language that when the corn ripens, it bends down.
It bends down.
This is a sign of humility.
Yes, but you're quite erect, and I would certainly not want to be moved to say that you're green in any area, certainly not in experience.
No, I said I was ripe, and then therefore I am full of humility, being aware of the vast amount of area that I have to cover.
Yes, but you bend spiritually and not physically. That's the point I'd better make here.
All right.
But apart from those countries where you served as ambassador, your travels, I know, have been very extensive.
Yes, I was very lucky in the fact that when I was in the Soviet Union, I had the opportunity not only of going to the countries to which I was specially accredited, but also to the nearby countries of Yugoslavia, Bulgaria, East Germany, Hungary, and of course all the countries of Western Europe. Then when I was in Moscow, I also had the chance of going to Peking on a visit of 6 weeks at the invitation of the Chinese government, and that was a wonderful experience. And before that I had been in Vietnam and Cambodia and Laos, Indonesia, Burma, Thailand. So I can say that, and I was in Mongolia also, so I can say that that part of the world I know fairly well.
Well, now, most of the countries you mentioned, particularly among the first 8 or 9, are all communist countries.
First 8 or 9, yes.
Yes.
But before I went to the communist countries, I went on a special kind of pilgrimage to all the Buddhist countries of Asia, because I was the president of the World Fellowship of Buddhists.
Yes.
From 1950 to 58, and in that connection I thought it my duty to visit these Buddhist countries.
Well, now, I'd be very much interested, Dr. Malalasekara, in what connection, if any, you find or found in the Buddhist countries and the communist countries. What relationship from the Buddhist countries to the communist ones?
Well, you know, this is a very interesting question, because many people ask me, can Buddhism and communism exist side by side? And my answer is that the two things have certain factors in common. For instance,
really?
Yes. For instance, both communism and Buddhism are chiefly concerned with what we do with our present life. Mm-hmm. You know, many religions put greater emphasis on what happens to you after death.
Yes.
But the teachings of Buddhism are more concerned with what you are going to do with your present life. The life hereafter can take care of itself if you live a good life in this world. And the communists also say they are not concerned about what happens to them after death, but they want to make this life as happy a life as possible. So now there is one.
All right, now if I may extend this question even further, how do you relate both the Buddhist and communist countries to the so-called Western countries, the Christian culture, the Judeo-Christian culture?
Well, the Judeo-Christian culture, of which we are aware because we had impact with 3 Christian countries in Ceylon, and culturally we find great deal of elements in common. So much so that there are many people who would say that Jesus Christ knew about Buddhism when he preached, for instance, the Sermon on the Mount. So that there are, therefore, ethically many considerations. And actually, in point of view of relationship, we are much closer to the Judeo-Christian culture than we are to communism. For one thing, Buddhism abhors violence for any reason whatsoever. Now, that is there. You have one particular example of the difference. I can go on, but I don't want to take up all your time.
No, but certainly countries which practice Buddhism, or where the large portion of the population practices Buddhism, haven't some of those countries engaged in violence in terms of wars down through history?
Well, when they did that, this was completely contrary to their ethics, and this was done very reluctantly, because wherever there was a chance of avoiding violence, they did that. Not because of fear or anything like that, but because they thought violence was intrinsically wrong. Because in our teachings, we are told that we have to show compassion and kindness, not only to human beings, but even to the smallest insect like an ant. We would not kill a mosquito if a mosquito came to suck our blood.
Well, now what do you do about snakes? I'm told that there are snakes in Ceylon.
Oh yes, when there are snakes, we avoid them. Well, I think you probably heard that sometimes we even give milk to snakes.
No, I hadn't. I hadn't heard that you fed milk to snakes.
Well, I have a grandmother, and sometimes snakes come into our garden. And when she sees a snake, she would go up to the snake and say, "Now, don't you know that there are children playing about and you must not come here?" And the snake would put up its head like that, and as though ashamed, and then slink away. And this same grandmother would give a saucer of milk to the snake, because she knows that the snake would not harm you unless you have wrong thoughts about the snake, that you want to kill the snake yourself. This we believe in.
Well, and you ought to spread this propaganda in the General Assembly, Dr. Malalasekara.
When we get a chance, we certainly do say that violence never accomplishes anything. It defeats its own purpose. Hatred never accomplishes anything. It defeats its own purpose. So these things we propagate when we get a chance, but it's not often we get a chance.
Now let me ask you this. I know that you have a fairly large family. How many children do you have?
6 children.
And of course now you have some grandchildren.
Yeah, there are 4 grandchildren.
Did you take your family with you when you first began your travels through the other Buddhist countries?
I took, we have 2 daughters. I took the elder daughter who had graduated from the university in biology. She went with me to Moscow as my private secretary, and she had a wedding there. So it was a wonderful experience. And after that, the other children
Well, now, wait a minute. You say she had a wedding in Moscow.
That's right.
Now, under what banner? This must have been under Buddhism.
Yeah. Well, that was is quite simple, because in the Soviet Union, we have groups of Buddhists, particularly in one republic called Buryat, Mongolia.
But that's way out in the east, isn't it?
Well, everything is possible when you have a will. What I did was I went to the Soviet Minister of Culture and said that my daughter wants to get married, and the young man came from Ceylon to get married to her. So I said, well, I like to have a Buddhist wedding, because that will please my daughter no end. And he said, what do you want me to do? I said, please get me 2 lamas from Buryat, Mongolia to be present at the wedding and give the new couple their blessing. So the Soviet minister said, that would be very nice. What do you suggest? I said, well, I understand that you have conferences with these lamas sometimes in Moscow. Why don't you summon them for a conference round about the date of our daughter's wedding? He said, don't worry, I'll get them for you. So he got them by plane, and they were housed in a hotel in Moscow for a whole week. And they had a wonderful time there, and they were present at the wedding. And this wedding was so interesting to everybody there that they took color films of the wedding, and it was shown in all the Soviet embassies, many parts of the world.
Well, Dr. Malalasekara, I would like to pursue the matter of Buddhism in Moscow in just a moment. But first, we have a message of interest.
View from the top, March 14, cut 2.
10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3.
Dr. Malalasekara, when you first became ambassador to the Soviet Union in 1957, this was your first diplomatic post. Didn't you miss teaching?
Very much indeed. So one of the things I did, one of the very first things I did as soon as I got to Moscow was to go to the rector of the University of Moscow and ask him whether he couldn't give me some teaching to do. So he very kindly took me to the president of the Academy of Sciences. And after a brief discussion, he got me a class, a regular class of graduate students in what is known as the Oriental Institute of the Academy of Sciences. And I taught them Buddhist philosophy for twice a week for very nearly 3 years.
Can you report any converts?
No, the idea was not to make any converts, because the Buddhists are not particularly anxious to make converts.
Yeah.
We like to know, to make known the teachings of our master for people to make use of them if they feel like it. We've never traded for converts in the marketplace.
Well, now, between your ambassadorial duties and then your additional duties as teaching Buddhism at the Academy of Science, did you have any time for any of the diplomatic parties?
Yes, because actually I found that most of the diplomatic work in Moscow consisted in going to parties and carrying on conversations with the other ambassadors, your diplomatic colleagues, and trying to find out what was passing in their minds, because one of the difficulties we experienced was to get news from the outer world.
Yes.
And diplomatic parties gave us also this opportunity, and also, of course, tasting a lot of Russian food, and not only Russian food but other kinds of food as well.
What about vodka?
I didn't drink vodka myself because I'm a Buddhist and I don't drink anything at all. But other people, of course, they indulge in vodka and wines and whiskeys and brandies and so on.
Well, how do those people survive through the numerous toasts that they propose during the course of a banquet?
Well, you have to have a very hardy frame in order to survive this. And I think this I can tell you that I found that among the Russian leaders, many of them would be served not with vodka but with water, because I think they had given special instructions to their butlers to bring them water in champagne glasses, vodka glasses, because as you know, vodka and water both have the same color. They are both colorless, and neither of them have any fizz. So there it was. But a great deal of drinking was going on, of course. And this is one of the trials of the diplomatic life. That
I should say so.
And well, this was part of the thing that happened in Moscow. And I remember when I was in Moscow, I was very pleasantly surprised to see that, contrary to general belief, people like Mr. Khrushchev drank very little. So much so that at Kremlin parties, from about 1959 onwards, no vodka was served at all. And I was partly responsible for this, because once I had a conversation with Mr. Khrushchev, he had given a lecture to a group of young people, a youth conference, asking them not to drink hard. So when I met him soon afterwards, I said, "Sir, how can you ask them not to drink? Because the belief is that you drink yourself." He said, "What nonsense. What nonsense." I said, "But what you give vodka at your Kremlin parties, what about that?" He said, "What do you suggest?" I said, "I suggest that you don't give vodka at your Kremlin parties." And I don't know whether it was because I said that, the post hoc propter hoc, whether it was because I said that or after I said that. And there was no vodka being served in the Kremlin from 1959 until I left in 1961, except once, when Yuri Gagarin made his
Oh, yes, the first
space
Sputnik flight. Yes.
That's right. And then everybody went mad, and Kremlin flowed with vodka.
I'd like to move, if I may, Dr. Malalasekara, from Moscow to India,
Oh, yes.
and ask you about the current relationships between India and your country of Ceylon.
Well, India and Ceylon are very closely linked culturally and in every other way. And generally, I think most of the time they are very friendly, so much so that India speaks of Ceylon as the pearl on India's brow. Sometimes when they want to be nasty to us, as occasionally happens, they speak of Ceylon as the footstool of India. At the moment, we are the pearl on India's brow because our Prime Minister has done a wonderful job trying to bring about a solution of the dispute between India and China regarding the Himalayan border.
Yes. Well, the Colombo plan, the Colombo conference was
yes.
partly due to, well, if not entirely due to her efforts in going to Peking.
Because Mrs. Bandaranayake, I think it required a great deal of courage on her part, but then she's a woman, and women have a great deal of courage, far more than men, I think, when it comes to when it comes to having to show courage.
Well, I think our country must have recognized that in sending a woman ambassador to your country. I think this is probably the first time in history that a woman prime minister and a woman ambassador from another country have been conferring upon their mutual problems.
That is right. That is true. And I believe, generally speaking, they have got on quite well.
Yes.
The two women, they find that they have lots of interests in common, apart from matters dealing with politics. Unfortunately, recently there has been a little unpleasantness between the two countries. There is no time to go into that question. But I think very soon we shall find a solution of that problem as well. But Mrs. Bandaranayake has been wonderful, because she, remember that she succeeded to a post where her husband has been assassinated.
Yes.
And the same thing might have happened to her. But she was prepared to risk her life because she felt that she was called upon to serve her people.
But she had actually no political experience and no background for this, did she?
Well,
apart from her husband, being married to her husband for so
Well,
many
she
years?
had been married to her husband for 25 years at the time that she succeeded to the office of Prime Minister. I wouldn't say she had no political background, because she had always been in the habit of going with her husband when he came here too, to meetings and listening to his speeches, and taking part in conferences where he was present, so that she knew what was working in his mind. But apart from that, she was the leader of a very active women's organization in Ceylon, of which my wife also worked with her for many years. And there she would go into the villages, talk to the people, both men and women, about the needs of education, sanitation, and political awakening and so on. So this was wonderful practice for her, and this was what made her very popular. And I think even now, when people come into power, generally they lose popularity because they have to do many unpopular things. But I think even now, her popularity is very high.
Well, it must have increased as a result of her successful trip to Peking and arranging for the Colombo conference.
Well, certainly her stock has risen very high as a result of that. And it required great courage to do that, go both to Peking and to New Delhi,
Yes.
sort of bearding the lion in his own den, so to speak.
Dr. Malalasekara, in the assassination of Prime Minister Bandaranayake, no solution has ever been found. How do you accept that from the Buddhist standpoint? I mean, no motive has ever been given. There's never been any rationale as to why he was assassinated, I believe, by a Buddhist monk.
Yeah. Well, there have been many reasons put forward, but the Buddhist monk himself, who became a layman when in the course of the trial, when people asked him, why did you kill him, he said, I have no reason to give, but I was impelled to kill him, because I think the real reason seems to have been that this man was disappointed, because when Mr. Bandaranayake was carrying on his political campaign, his election campaign, he promised to do all kinds of things for the Buddhists, which he found it was not so easy to accomplish in the short space of time. And I think the Buddhists, who had been suffering for 400 years under the foreign colonialists, they expected very quick results. And it is difficult to produce quick results in a multiracial, multi-religious society where the Prime Minister has to hold the balance even between the different parties concerned. So I think that was, if any reason at all, that was the reason.
Well, Dr. Malalasekara, we will continue with our conversation in just a moment after this message.
View from the top, March 14, cut 3.
10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3.
Dr. Malalasekara, I would like to now discuss the role of your country, of Ceylon, as a non-aligned country. How does it feel to you to move between the areas of the two so-called blocks, the Eastern and the Western?
You see, the role of a non-aligned country like ours is primarily to have contacts with both the so-called blocks, both the Eastern Bloc and the Western Bloc. And this is very necessary, particularly for a country like mine, because we are underdeveloped. And one of the things that independence has meant for us is that we should do our best to raise the standard of living among the people. unless we have economic independence, unless the standard of living of the people is raised, then independence is just like Dead Sea fruit.
It has little meaning.
Very little meaning.
Yes. And you have
So-
approximately how many people?
10 million people.
10 million people.
10 million
yes.
people, and the population increasing at the rate of 250,000 every year.
Yes.
So by 1970, I think we are going to have 13 million people or something like that. So that in order to do this, to raise the standard of living of the people, we have to get as far as possible assistance from countries that could render assistance, like this country, Great Britain and so on, and the Soviet Union, and also have trade with all these countries, because we do have to have trade with the outside world in order to sell our produce, to get foreign exchange, and in order to get technical assistance and expert advice and so on from other countries. So that this, our matter of foreign policy is something which is ruled by our self-interest, apart from other things. Now in Ceylon, for instance, we are an old country. With 25 centuries, our history goes back. And we have always played the role of good neighbor. We sent our cultural ambassadors to Cambodia, Burma, Thailand, and they came to us because of our Buddhist culture. And they were greatly interested, and we were greatly interested in propagating it. But now our role is to do whatever we can in order to bring about understanding between these opposing blocs. Because if there is a war in the world, then it's not only they who suffer, but also we.
Well, now, do you, as a so-called non-aligned country, and do you particularly, personally, as an ambassador to the United Nations, feel that this policy has been successful? Do you feel that you've brought understanding between the two blocs?
Oh yes, this we can undoubtedly claim. One of the most recent instances was with regard to Cuba, when there was a confrontation between the two giants. It was the non-aligned countries that went up to U Thant and asked him to intercede, and his intervention, as you know, was, if not wholly, at least partly responsible for the fact that there was a negotiated peace between the two countries, and what threatened to be a nuclear war was stopped in the nick of time.
Well, and from that standpoint, the fact that you are not economically sufficient really has some world value. I assume that if you were economically sufficient, you might then choose one bloc or the other.
No, I don't think so. Because I think the policy of non-alignment is that we must not choose the one or the other, because it will be completely contrary to our basic principles. The basic principles of non-alignment is that we must not be unduly prejudiced in favor of one party or the other.
Well, let me ask you this. As a member of the British Commonwealth of Nations, you are aligned in that sense, aren't you?
In the sense that we are a member of a family, but that has not taken away our national sovereignty. In fact, I think the United Kingdom welcomes the fact that many of the members of this family do not necessarily agree with the United Kingdom in her policy.
No, but I'm concerned about the economic assistance that you get as being a member of the family of the British Commonwealth.
That is right. So we do get a lot of assistance from the British Commonwealth. We got a lot of assistance from the United States. We get a lot of assistance from the Soviet Union. The largest measure of assistance has come not from the UK, but from the USA. And now we are not a member of the USA, we are a member of the Commonwealth. But that hasn't prevented us from getting assistance. Because this assistance is a two-way thing. You know, when a country gives assistance, it is not purely a matter of charity. This is also in the interest of the country that gives assistance to make us highly developed, because then we can become possible markets for their commodities. The higher our standard of living, the greater our needs become, and the greater the possibility of your trading with us. So this is not charity.
Yes. Yeah. Well, Dr. Malalasekara, I want to thank you very much for being our guest on View from the Top, and I hope that we'll have an opportunity to talk again sometime in the future.
Thank you very much. I have enjoyed my experience.
Thank you. I hope that you'll join me again next week for another View from the Top. Until then, this is Arnold Michaelis.